Welcome, everybody. It's me, James. This is another Aptora coworker training webinar. And for those of you that don't work here and wondering why you're hearing it, it's because we decided to make these public a while back. What we do is we train on Total Office Manager and other software every week. We invite our sister company, RA Tax and Accounting. It's required for some, it's highly recommended for others. And we train every week on various topics. The topics just depend on what we've been hearing lately or whatever makes sense at that particular time. And they do vary, so I invite you to look around and check out other webinars that we've created. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about items and flat rate pricing. We get a lot of questions on how to flat rate in Total Office Manager. A lot of the technique is more of a best practice than it is our advice. And you might remember tech support is here to tech support is here to answer black and white questions such as 2 + 2 = 4. What does this form do exactly? Where does this number come from? But they need to avoid offering advice, especially on business practices and techniques, best practices, things like that. That's not tech support. That's more of a consultant's job. Tech support oftentimes gets into that because they know how, they can. But I want to remind everybody that tech support is black and white. It's the job of your account rep and your consultant and your advisors, your accountants, people like that, your trainers here at Aptora, to get into best practices or how they might recommend you handle something. That's what this video is going to do. Today, we're going to give you some options on how you could do flat rate pricing in your company. First thing I'd like to do is come up with a scenario. Let's pretend like we want to flat rate an HVAC company. Sorry if you do other work, but of course, we have to come up with some example, right? So I'm going to come up with an HVAC example. And I'm going to do a motor replacement since HVAC and motors are so common. And this would apply to plumbing, electrical, or anything else. Let's pretend like we want to create a flat rate book for an HVAC company and we want to focus on motors, motor replacements. And that might be fan motors, such as a motor inside of a furnace or an air handler. Or it could be a condensing unit fan motor. Either way, we want to focus on fan motors. So the first thing we need to do is go out and get a list of fan motors and pricing from our favorite supplier. Let's take a look at one. Here I'm looking at an Excel spreadsheet that has lots of motors, and I've highlighted some. And I have more here than I want. So let's change our category to exclude motor mounting items. And let's get rid of capacitors. There we go. That's looking better. All right, so I've highlighted a few to make a point. Notice I have motors here highlighted, condensing unit motor. Sorry, they're abbreviated because this is not a task, it's the part. Condensing unit motor, single speed, 230 volt, quarter horse, different voltages. You notice how we have different speeds, different voltages, different horsepowers, but the pricing is very similar. It's $49 up to $58. And the retail pricing for these is only $61 up to $72. So there's only a $10 difference on a wide range of motors. Now you might wonder why the item retail is so small in comparison to the cost, because this is another video. If you're flat rating, you want the vast majority of your overhead burden and profit to come from labor sales. Labor is the reason why you have all of your overhead. Managing parts is a very small amount of it. The only reason why you have parts is because you have labor. Your labor sells parts. You probably don't sell parts over the counter. If you did, that's different. The pricing needs to be different. These part pricing assume that we're delivering it and installing it and warranting it, and that's all done with people, labor. Labor is where all your overhead comes from. So we make actually very little money on our part. We make our money on labor. And for the same hour of labor, I can install any of these parts. Here we have a larger motor, a half horse, and it gets a little more expensive. It's 65. And then we have these multi-horsepower motors, and they're 71 apiece. And we have another half horse motor that's 80. So we could create 2 or 3 tasks here. We could create a single task for all these motors. We could create another task when we use a universal blower motor. They cost more, but they're universal. 6 horse all the way up to half horse. You could argue you're overcharging the 6 horsepower person and you're undercharging the half horsepower person in a way. But that's the nature of that universal motor, which reminds me of a universal task, doesn't it? You can create a task that you could consider universal. It could be, we will replace a 1/3, 1/4, or even a 1/6 up to 1/2 or 1/3 certainly motor up to 3 speeds, any voltage, 115 to 230, single phase. You could group all those together. And that would keep your book a lot smaller. You notice that here I have a whole list of motors, and there's not that many. Out of a spreadsheet of I think something like 3,000, 4,000 items here, I've really got a small number of motors that take care of most situations. And we could apply the same principle to inducer motors, draft inducer motors, and other motors. All right, so once we get that list, then we need to apply our pricing, our markup. We could do it here or elsewhere. And we have other information we could collect. And then if you wanted to, at this point, you could then import all of those items into Total Office Manager. And we're not going to go through that. That's called a rabbit hole, right? We could easily turn this into a 2-hour video. You could then import them into the software. Now, what do you do with them? How do you create your flat rate task? That's what I want to talk about now. The first step was to get all your items gathered up and decide if you're going to put them in here as inventory or non-inventory, and you can discuss that with a trainer or a consultant, your accountant. Hint, make it inventory. That's my hint. Make these inventory. Let's open up our invoice item list, and we could do it here or under our popular lists here. This is a list of all the items that can be on an invoice, and it could be inventory, non-inventory, discounts, etc. I'm going to click active. So here I have 7,500 of them. And I have 2 different tasks in here that I wanted us to talk about today. So I put a $sign on the number. So if I search for a $sign, it should just find 2. And there they are. And by the way, that's a technique you could use when you're working on common items or you need to search for common items all day long. You could put a special character on them that could be removed later, and that would allow you to work on those, maintain those, move them around, do what you need to do. Here I have a service item and I have a group item. And let's look at the group item. One common way to create a flat rate task in software, including ours, any software really, is to create a group item. And different programs could call it different things, but this technique is not unusual to Total Office Manager. You would give it a number that makes sense, put it into a category that makes sense, and give it a description. And then you would add items to the group tab. And here we can see that we have a capacitor, a motor. We could have an OEM upcharge if we wanted to. So in other words, we have one price for a stock motor, and then we could have an upcharge if it's OEM. And that gives us extra money for what? To go out and get it, to go get that motor. It's not on our truck. We got to go get it. And then we have a labor fee. So we have a capacitor, motor, labor fee, possibly an OEM upcharge. And you could add other things to this as well, like a mounting kit, capacitor mounting kit. So there's a mounting kit, because we always want to use one. And if you don't need it, you can take it off. And what happens on the general tab is it starts adding up all these prices and tells you what it's going to cost at a retail level. So your retail investment for this service is $424.02. Now let's hit save and close and look at that in an invoice. I'm going to pick a customer at random, so we have somebody in here. And then we'll go find that task. Now I could use the lookup feature if I wanted to, or if I happen to know the number, then I can start typing in the number. But a lot of times you don't. So you use the lookup feature so that you can search using different criteria. Like you might want to search for that dollar sign. And why didn't it find it? Well, it's searching the wrong field. So let's go get the right field. And let's clear out the inventory part filter. And there it is. So we're going to grab that task right there, the group item, and put it on the invoice. Now, this is a common technique, as I said earlier, on flat rating, and it's a good technique. The advantage of this is that you have all the items on here already. And your technicians could do the same thing in the field with Total Office Manager or with the mobile app, either one. Same technique, slightly different screen, of course. But again, the advantage here is that I can go search for the description, find it, and all the parts are on here. The trouble is this may not have been an OEM. It may have been truck stock. So you either have to get rid of the OEM or you have to double your tasks. You have to have OEM, non-OEM. So you might have to get rid of something like the OEM. And now your price just changed. And maybe you did not use the capacitor mounting kit. Maybe you didn't use it. It had one. So you get rid of it. Otherwise, you're going to mess up inventory and the price just changed. Or it could have changed. The capacitor, a 5 microfarad? Nope, we used a 7.5, 12, whatever. So now you're going to have to change the capacitor, go find the correct capacitor. And you don't have any of those, supposedly. And that could change your price. The challenge with a group item is that it has to be right. Otherwise, it's going to start changing your pricing, assuming that you have a retail price for all of the items within the group. You could put one single item in the group that represents the entire retail price. And then the other items could have a retail price of 0. That might be acceptable. It's something you would want to talk to a consultant, a trainer about, because it does have implications on your financial statements, such as where did the income come from? Do you want to break out labor, materials, equipment, parts, supplies? You might want to. I think you should. That's my problem with the group item. You might have noticed there was another one to talk about. It was a service item. Let's take a look at it. So here I created a service item type. And you might remember when you create items, you decide what type it's going to be. I decided on a service item and I gave it a description of replace quarter horse. Now, what I could have done is I could have simply said replace 1/6 to 1/3 horse truck stock fan motor. It could have gone on to say that it could have been any frame, any speed, single phase, 115, 208, 230 volts, etc. Any capacitor. So I probably wouldn't want to say any motor. What about a three phase? I might have one on my truck. And I certainly want to say truck stock because we want to make sure that we know the difference between an item we have on our truck, normally have on our truck, versus an item that we're certainly going to have to go get. And that would encompass, as we saw from the spreadsheet, many different motor scenarios, at least 10. Well, where are the items? You might be thinking that's the problem with this type is you don't have any items on here. And we need inventory control. I just got done saying earlier, I said hint, inventory control, and I preach it. So how would this work? Let's take a look at that. Let's open up another invoice. Let's pick another customer. Pick me. I've got all kinds of problems, don't I? And then let's type in that service number. And if you didn't happen to know what it was, I left it up here, but we could use the lookup. FNA dash. And that's close enough because I can see it right there. All right, so it's 530.86. What happens if we don't need the capacitor mounting kit? How much is it? It's 530.86. What if we use a different capacitor? What if we use a third horse, a sixth horse, a quarter horse, 208, 230, 115? How much is it then? 530.86. What if it takes more than an hour? How much is it? 530.86. So you're telling me it's 530.86 no matter what? Yes, I am. As long as you pick the right task, it's 530.86. Now, if you happen to attempt to take off the fan and you break the fan, whether it's a blower wheel or a fan blade, if you damage it trying to remove it, then you might charge for a fan blade. Depends on your policy. But it's still 530.86 on the motor replacement, no matter what happens. What about inventory control? Well, that's actually easier than you would guess because now what you're doing is you are simply putting the items on that you used. So in mobile, it's a matter of scanning the barcodes or finding the items with your finger and just adding them to the work order or the invoice. The key is the retail price of those items is 0. That way you have good inventory control, but you don't have to worry about changing the price all the time on that particular task. So if it was a group item, of course, you adjust it, you're changing the prices around. So how do we add those items? Well, again, just depends. If you're in the desktop software, click lookup, and then just start searching for those. If you know what types they are, you can narrow your search down. Sales description, you might start typing in things like mounting kit. Normally, you'd narrow it down to make it easier to find what you're looking for. But then you would just start adding them. So there's a kit, and then the capacitor. Maybe it was the 12 microfarad. So I'll type in 5 MFD. I said 12. Maybe we'll pretend like it's 5. and then I go find it. Oh, there's a 12 anyway right there. So add the 12.5 capacitor. And, remember on capacitors, they're all about the same price, aren't they? Regardless of the voltage, within a certain range, you could fill a shoebox with capacitors, and they'd all be within 10%, 15% certainly in pricing. And remember, we're making our money on labor. You would just keep doing this until you have all the items on here. And then finally, you'd add labor. And let's say that you forgot, you would put labor on here by hand. We'll find service labor. We have overtime, regular. Yours could look a little different. And how much time did we spend on it? 60 minutes. And remember, the key to this is that I picked the wrong mounting kit. Let me find the right mounting kit. I just realized that mounting kit was a group item, and I didn't want that. Yes, sir. Capacitor mounting kit. All right. Well, let's go back to look up. I guess that's the real world. You're going to have mess ups in real life. I picked a group item for a mounting kit, which I wouldn't want to do. Capacitor mounting kit. Make sure that's not a group. It is. What's with all the groups? I don't know why I decided to put all these groups in there. That must have been a training exercise. All right, well, I'm going to skip the mount. All right, so the key to this is to make sure your retail pricing is 0, because the retail price got picked up on the service item. Now, we actually have a markup method called 0 retail price, and you could use that markup method if you wanted to. Otherwise, you could override these to 0. Also, you have options, right? You can have a default markup method of 0 retail price for this customer. You could put the markup method of 0 retail price in the header and apply it to all the items. And you could also simply zero out the retail prices. The service item doesn't have a cost, so its retail price will remain unchanged. The markup method, of course, looks at the price you paid and multiplies it or divides it, depending, to come up with the retail price. So that will zero out the retail price of all the items that have a cost and leave the service item alone. No matter what items you put on here, it's still $530.86 plus the diagnostic fee, if that's what you wanted. So the service item technique, I think, is great. Now, how do we print that out? Well, let's go to print this. They have a service agreement. We didn't give them a discount. You want to save anyway? I do. Reimbursables, no. Item race, no. I don't want to deal with that either. All right, so here is our print options. Now we can present this in many different ways, but there's our flat rate presentation. We have the diagnostic fee, and we have the motor replacement, and you notice none of the items are on here. So we don't want to show those items, but they're there behind the scenes, so we have proper accounting. We could have done the same thing with the group item, of course. So don't worry about presentation, whether it's the desktop or the mobile, you can still present it as a flat rate repair where you're not introducing your client to all the minutia, all the items and the pricing and questions that go along with it. There's one more technique available to you, and that is you could simply, in mobile or the desktop, you could build your invoice out. So you would come in here and you would add the various items, and I'm just going to throw in some prices here. So we have them. Say that's 22. Make this say 400. And our labor right there. So you can just add items. I'm going to just randomly add something else just to get it in here. Temp control. Don't have any. That's fine. Now, what you would do is you would assess the situation. That's the diagnostic process. You would build out the work order or the invoice. You would add all the items that you think you're going to need. You put in the labor that you think you're going to need, etc. And whatever that investment turns out to be, say it's $765.40, you would approach the client and say, I have your situation figured out. I need to replace the condensing unit fan motor, as we call it, the motor run capacitor. I need to update the electrical to accommodate that. I'm going to install a mounting kit for the capacitor. I'm also going to install a commercial temp control. Of course, I made that part up, etc. Your total investment is going to be $765.40. May I go ahead with that work? Yeah, I guess we got to do it. That seems like a lot of money, but yeah, I guess we got to do it. And then once you secure permission, you would say, okay, very well. I have everything on my vehicle. If I don't, it doesn't cost any extra. But I have everything on my vehicle. I'm going to get started. Once I get that work finished, I'm going to run your system for about 15 minutes, and I'm going to complete the rest of my diagnostic process with the machine running. And if I see any other issues, I'll come talk to you about it. Nothing else is going to happen without your approval. So now you're covered if you find out there's something else wrong, such as it's low on refrigerant. Now, what if they want to see a paper copy? You haven't showed them the screen. You knew the price, but at some point, you're going to need to email them the invoice or print the invoice. That's no problem, as you probably know, because you have options for that. Disallowed selling out-of-stock items. Hey, you're getting an idea of all the preferences in the software, right? So I removed it. We're going to go back, and we're going to say, I just want a single summary. Hit preview. And now what we would do is we would just simply enter a good description of our work. And if you're out in mobile, you know that you have a database of repair descriptions, and you can also use speech to text. But you would replace this with a good explanation, and they will not see all the details. That allows you to build a time and material work order or invoice and go through the flat rate presentation. And the advantage of doing that is simple. You don't have any flat rate tasks to build. You have very good accounting. You have good inventory control. It's totally flexible. And it's very precise because you are pricing it out exactly for that scenario. You might still have some universal repairs, tasks, service items like cleaning a coil, dirty, very dirty, ridiculously dirty. You might still have those. But this is going to allow you to be very precise in the items that you pick, and the labor, you'll be able to predict it. The disadvantage might be, depends on your company, but the disadvantage could be now you're asking your technicians to do all this. You're asking them to pick all these items. If you think about it, though, that's what you did before. They had to pick all these items anyway. You just had them do it after the task was over. When it was all over under time material, you still had them pick all these things. And if you didn't, you should have been, if you wanted inventory control and you wanted better accounting. They were still doing it. They were doing it after the task. So really the only question is, could they have done it before the task? And the answer is, of course. And if you're a technician or a former tech, you know what you're going to need. And you could get it wrong here and there, but you're going to do that with flat rate tasks and group items anyway. So this is an option for you. And really, another option for you is to do all three. You could do group items, service items, and build as you go. Because there'll be times where build as you go is the only viable option. It's just not in the flat rate book. You don't have a scenario like this. You're replacing 3/4 inch pillow block bearings on an air handler that you've never seen in your life. And you got to go get them and bring them back. And the tear down could be ridiculous. You're not going to have that in your flat rate book. And when you're finished, you probably don't need it in there. So that would be time and material. But you're going to build out a time material invoice and present it as flat rate. So you're doing it anyway, is my point. So those are three options for you to think about when it comes to flat rate. Now, that isn't the only possibility. There's all kinds of other possibilities. There's different ramifications for accounting and reporting and so forth. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to think about how group items work and the disadvantage, the advantage of a service item, because it allows you to group up your repairs and then add items as needed with a zero retail price. And then, of course, build as you go. People often ask, which do you prefer? I like all three. I'll give you an example of a group item that's perfect. I'm a plumber and I'm replacing the stainless steel tubular under a sink, all the tubular. And I might have an add-on to replace the shutoff valves and the supply lines. Well, that's a great group item because chances are I'm going to use everything in that group item. I mean, I know the size of the pipe, whether it's a lavatory or a kitchen or a commercial kitchen. So I have lavatory, residential kitchen, commercial kitchen. Let's talk residential. Lavatory or the kitchen. I got a really good idea. I know the two stop valves for sure, straight, maybe angle. Supply tubes, maybe 12 versus 16. But the tubular pieces, all those pieces, I can really predict that well. So a group item would make a lot of sense for an electrician or a plumber that uses lots of parts, and those are very predictable. In the HVAC world, we have scenarios that are very predictable, especially OEM repairs. OEM, where nothing else will work. It is this board and this board only. It's this motor and this motor only. Also for maintenance work, where we have coil cleaner, filters, water panels, valves, labor, that would make a good group item. But there's other scenarios where a service item makes far more sense, such as the blower motor, where we have 10 motors that are basically the same price. And then again, to wrap this up, we have the oddball scenario, build as you go. So I like all three. I would encourage you to practice all three. I would just make sure that you are calling most of your items inventory items. You're buying them, putting in inventory, relieving inventory. I know you can do it. A lot of people think it's difficult. It is not. It's just a matter of having the information you need to do it. But once you do, it's not that difficult. You know, teenagers are doing it up at the hardware store all day long. We can do it too. Okay. Were there any questions about what we talked about today? All right. Nobody? Okay. Well, if you watch these training videos, then you're probably used to that. Not a lot of questions. That's fine. So that concludes this video on flat rate pricing. As I said, it is not all inclusive. We could spend a whole day. I've done it. I have workshops on this. I have conducted workshops that start at 8 and end at 4:30, and everyone is exhausted. And it's nothing but flat rating. That's it. And even then, when they go home exhausted, I tell them we could have spent 2 more days talking about this. Why is there so much to talk about? Just because there's lots of options. But keep in mind, once you decide on things, it's a whole lot easier to manage. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time and attendance. I'm James Leichter. Thank you.